start off, Marisa, with you, because not really much of a surprise coming through here, where we've got Vodaphone, the controlling company, being red. Your overall impression of the kind of move Vodacom's making here in South Africa?
Well, I think it's strategically it's a good move. It's obviously it had to come considering the Africa strategy. I think just from a global brand to local brand, I think what they've done is they've adopted Vodafone but kept the Vodacom. Chris, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I think from our side they've gone cautiously. They've tried to respect the equity that sits in the Vodacom brand and its name.
That's exactly it, because the question out there at this stage of the game is why not go the whole hog and change the name in the first place?
Alishia, a very good point. And I mean, you referenced that perhaps the brand is changing its colour and that's the core focus. But I think you've admitted to acknowledge that it's also changed its mark. We're seeing the Vodaphone symbol being used alongside the Vodacom.
Which is a speech mark, right?
Exactly correct. And migrations are sensitive things. You've got equity that you need to respect in previous brands. You've got new stakeholders. And I think as Marisa's just mentioned, that they certainly must be thinking about an African strategy. Vodafone will have certainly more power within the African markets than Vodacom does. While Vodacom plays in Tanzania and some of the East African markets, other than that, it's nowhere else.
Of course, this is in a context where we've had Vodacom really struggling to get its foothold entrenched on the African continent if we compare it to the likes of an MTN. So how do you see this new association working in its favour, Marisa?
Well, it's a bit of a tough one because Vodafone obviously globally is a very powerful brand. We don't essentially know what Vodacom as the name will do within Africa, and I think the association with the word mark and the name change itself will potentially give them a lot more leverage. Whether or not that impacts, I think time will have to tell.
Yeah, well, at the moment, this entire change has come with a price tag, as I was saying earlier, of 200 million rand. The company is saying well within budget, where it's looking at probably close to 500 and 700 million rand a year, that its marketing budget. So it's not a huge amount in the bigger picture. How are you rating the effectiveness of all the advertising we're seeing right now?
Alishia, I think right now they're in an awareness building phase. They're trying to generate awareness around the change, and a certain amount of investment needs to take place for that to be effective. I think my concern would be about how they move out of that awareness phase and into an equity building relationship phase, where they start to deliver on their promises and start to translate why the change was valuable. Price tag of 200 million rand. It's being debated. I was on Twitter this morning and looking at whether that is valid. Vodacom have come out strongly saying, absolutely, this is what we have spent. I debate whether they're spending a little bit more or not. My question would be, when are they going to spend that again? We had a debate, Marisa and myself, on the way across here. They've changed the mark. They've gone to the Vodafone mark, but they've stuck with the Vodacom name. That means that everything that is branded, from signage to all of their collateral, has to be changed. When the eventual migration occurs to Vodaphone, which I'm sure is fait accompli, it needs to happen at some stage, they will need to re-spend, certainly not maybe the 200 million rand figure that was mentioned this time, but they will need to spend it again, changing their name. So a very cautious approach that they've taken, but I think one that has been taken with due diligence.
Marisa, if we're looking at things from a return on investment perspective, I mean, we're speaking about things in terms of Vodaphone's African strategy. Locally, how do you see the South African consumer actually adapting and taking to this new brand?
I don't think there'll be any massive pushback in terms of the rebrand at all. And I think let's not underestimate the power of brands that have changed historically. Let's just look at MTN and a few others. There wasn't a massive shift within the South African consumer's mind. And I think we are very open to global brands as South Africans. And I think whilst we have a lot of entrenched loyalty within the Vodacom name, I think there is a lot that comes with the rebrand that I think we'll see in the months to come in terms of simplicity of services, greater networks, that I think will offset that.
Well, certainly, from some of the commentary I've been reading around this entire rebranding exercise, what has stood out is the likeness of the colours of now Vodacom compared to Cell C, where in advertising, differentiation often stands out as a very prominent factor. So how do you see that Vodacom achieving its differentiating factor?
Well, let's not forget that Cell C itself has just gone through its own rebrand, its own migration to what is predominantly a black brand. And I think that wasn't done without insight to the fact that Vodaphone was coming to this market with deeper pockets and being able to outspend perhaps a smaller player like Cell C. I think I would put less emphasis on the brand colour and its identity, and more emphasis on the service delivery, the product itself, and the way that Vodafone is seen to add value to the South African consumer. That will create a lot of their differentiation within the market.
Do you see any big stumbling blocks or challenges to this campaign moving forward?
Not necessarily. I think what they definitely need to do is make sure that simplicity, that promise that they've given the market in terms of being simpler, isn't just coming through within the identity. It can't just be a logo change. It has to be service-driven. They're an 18-year-old brand. They're very large. They've become cumbersome, and they need to become a lot more agile and become very focused on service delivery, like Chris was saying. And I think that will follow through. And if they don't, then that could be a large stumbling block, essentially.
On your end, Chris, very much in line with what Marisa said?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to reiterate that, I think I would like to see this campaign move from awareness building and into an equity building phase. I think we all know the Vodacom brand. It has great awareness. If you look at some of its competitors like MTN, MTN's a far more valuable brand. It has a better relationship with some of its consumers in terms of the equity of what it stands for. I think Vodacom should use the Vodaphone brand to better build that promise.
How so? What has MTN been getting right that Vodacom hasn't?
I think it stood for quite a coherent promise. Up until the Player 23 campaign, if you asked me as a consumer and not as a brand specialist, I would be a little bit confused as to what the promise that Vodacom was delivering to me. Player 23 steps in and suddenly it is the biggest supporter of South African supporters. That sort of struck a chord with me. I understood what it was. MTN was a little bit about accessibility. It was about go. It was about being everywhere. It had a clear African strategy. That brand promise for me has just been a little bit clearer and coherent through its marketing material and its brand building activity throughout the years.
So it's that follow through that we're waiting for. Thanks to you both for joining us in studio this afternoon.